All right, this is the this is some of the speech that the Rebbe gave in 1991. I guess it was 91, 92. Tafshin Nun Beis at the last Shluchim convention that the Lubavitcher Rebbe spoke at, and he was giving his orders for all the generations to come. Namely, we have to bring Mashiach. And the Rebbe said that the way it's done is by being a shliach. And even more, the word shliach is the same gematria, numerical value, as the word Mashiach. You just have to add 10. Namely, if a shliach, emissary, uses all the 10 powers of the soul, then this is what is required to bring Mashiach, and guaranteed to bring Mashiach. So you have to be a shliach, and in fact, the Mashiach himself, the Messiah, he's going to be a shliach of God to bring all the Jews to do the Torah and the commandments and build the temple and bring them all back to Israel. So we have to be a shliach, we have to be shluchim, we have to be emissaries of the previous Rebbe, of the Rebbe. The Rebbe was humbly talking about the previous Rebbe being the leader, means himself. We have to be shluchim, we have to be emissaries. And only through that can we bring the Mashiach, who himself will be the ultimate emissary of the Creator. But how do we do this? So the Rebbe says we can learn from this week's Torah portion. This week's Torah portion, we have that Abraham gave Eliezer, his servant, the job of finding a match for his son Yitzchak. Now this might seem to be a sort of a mundane thing, but you have to remember that these were the fathers of all mankind. That Abraham's son Yitzchak was what he was praying for his whole life, because no one really got the point of life, why we're here, except for Abraham. He was the only one that got it. Everybody else was spiritual. We're here to go to heaven, or we're here to have fun. And Abraham was the only one to understand, like we're just finished learning in the Mimer, that we're here in order to serve the Creator with self-sacrifice. He was the only one that got the purpose. And his son was the one that was carrying it out after him. So it was very important that his son should get married so that he would have the completion. There had to be 3 forefathers, 3 of them. Avram, Yitzchak, there was no Yaakov. Yaakov could only be born if Yitzchak was married. So he had to find a wife. So it says a very interesting thing, that Abraham sent the Eliezer, his servant, and he gave him everything. He gave him everything. He gave him a deed, and this deed said, everything I own belongs to my son. Everything I own belongs to my son. In other words, Abraham relinquished all of his belongings, and he was a rich person, all of his belongings, everything, to his son Yitzchak. So he says, how could he, in other words, what does it mean that Abraham gave up everything? And he put this document in the hands of Eliezer. Abraham had no doubts that Eliezer would do what he was supposed to do, because he was no existence for himself. And that, if you remember, we talked about before, this idea that Eliezer was a emissary. Was he an emissary? In other words, did he take the place of Abraham? Whatever he did was Abraham, or was he just an agent? He had a job to do, and he could make his own mind up however he wanted to do it, but he had a job to do to make the shidduch. And he wasn't a part of Abraham. So we see that he was really both. Okay, so ask the question, how could Abraham give everything he had to Eliezer? Rebbe said the explanation is, first of all, we have to ask a klutz question, a very, an obvious question. Abraham gave a deed, everything he had. That everything, Abraham was saying, I don't have anything anymore. I gave everything to Yitzchak. Why? In order that people would jump and marry his son. Even regarding charity, the law is you're not supposed to give away everything that you have. And it says even more, if you give away everything that you have, in charity, this is talking about a commandment, then you're transgressing on the Torah. Shari, it says in the Torah, mi kol asher lo, below et kol asher lo. You have to give from what you have, but not everything that you have. How can it be that Avram gave everything that he had to Yitzchak? Even though you can say, okay, he already gave it to him as an inheritance after he died. And then, even then it wouldn't be understood. How much more so that that the ladies, whoever the woman was chosen, she would be interested in marrying him. If it was only an inheritance, right? If it was only an inheritance, then why would he give everything that he had before he died? Elorak Rov. He should have given the majority. That would have been enough. That would have been enough. He wanted to encourage the young ladies, whoever the lady was going to be chosen, to go and marry her. So it would have been enough to give half, three quarters. Avram was tremendously rich. That would have been an incentive enough for the future bride to agree to come and marry Yitzchak. Give her $20 million, right? Abraham had a $50 million. So give her 20, give her 40. You don't have to give everything. Even more, Avram, at the time when he sent Eliezer to marry Yitzchak, he was 140 years old. In other words, he had still 35 years to live. Therefore, he would have had to have something for himself. Something, especially after, says Avram afterwards, he took more wives. We'll see afterwards. So how could Abraham give everything away and leave himself penniless? Maybe we can say it like this. It says that Yitzchak was the son of Avram. Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. In other words, the face of Yitzchak was exactly the same as Avram. That also, in their innerness, they were really like one person. So therefore, by giving to Yitzchak, he wasn't really giving anything away. Says the Rebbe, okay, you can say that. But the fact of the matter is, according to Nigla, according to the law of the Torah, and Abraham did the whole Torah, you're not supposed to do that. You're not supposed to give away everything you have to anyone, not even to your son. Says the Rebbe, the explanation is like this. And this, of course, is going to teach us something about shlichus. Getting married and the preparation for getting married, the first real marriage that's described in the Torah was Yitzchak and Rivka. Their marriage is not just a historical detail, Yitzchak and Rivka, but it is the most general thing there can be. This was the first marriage of a Jewish couple in the Torah, after the commandment of Milah. True, Adam married Chava, but the first a Jewish couple, the man had been circumcised, and he was a Jew. Abraham married Sarah, but that was way before he was circumcised. And even more, by means of this marriage, there were offspring that was, what does it mean? All the Jewish people. In other words, in addition to the individual marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, which actually did historically occur, but also their marriage, this expresses the marriages of all the Jewish people for all the generations that came. All these marriages bring offspring that included, that made possible that the Jewish people would be until now. So therefore, Abraham gave everything that he had. Why? Because this was not just an individual wedding between individual people, and that Abraham was the father of the groom. But this was really represented the marriage of all of the Jewish people for all the generations. So therefore, this is relevant every way to Abraham himself. Because Abraham, he was the head of the Jewish people, the beginning of the Jewish people, the first Jew. And therefore, he put everything that he had into this. Kol asher lo. Abraham sunk all of his soul and his possessions into this wedding. If it was talking about an individual, a separate father of Yitzchak, as then you're right, it wouldn't be fitting that he would give everything he had for the wedding. Then it should be a good question, only a little bit. He should have given him a big portion, 90%. And a little bit he would have remained for himself. But me'achar, since that this marriage was the most general thing possible, and it included all of the Jewish people and every single Jew from all the generations. That's the whole thing of Avram. Avram was the head of all the Jews, the first Jew. Therefore, Abraham, for the future generations, there was no place that he would leave anything, even the smallest detail, in a way that Abraham would be separate from it. I have to leave a little bit for myself. I say, Therefore, Abraham gave everything that he had. He gave all of his whole entire being, everything that he had. And even more, this marriage came from the power of Avram. It says Avram gave birth to Yitzchak. Avram circumcised Yitzchak. Afterwards, Avram made the shidduch with Eliezer. Therefore, Abraham had to give everything that he had because it all came from Abraham. According to this, now we can even make it better. We can see that Eliezer was not really just an agent, a separate existence to himself. Eliezer, he was a shliach. Up to now, we've explained why Abraham was totally devoted to this whole thing, and that Abraham left absolutely nothing for himself. But what about Eliezer? So why didn't Abraham do it himself? Why didn't he go? Right? It was only 3 years after Abraham still had 35 years to live. He was still a healthy person. Could have gone on his own. Why did he send Eliezer? He says you have to know that Eliezer was the invention of a new level of interpersonal relationships. Eliezer was the first person to be a shliach. He was just an extension of Abraham. He was not an agent of Abraham. He was the hand of Abraham. Just like Abraham gave everything he had. And it had to be total without leaving any detail behind. Also, it's understood to Eliezer. And especially because Eliezer was a part of this thing. He had the deed that said, everything I have, I'm giving to Yitzchak. Eliezer, also, all of his being, even when he went to do the shidduch, and even when he did things of his own opinion, right? Like we learned yesterday in the Chumash class, right? He said, if a girl comes out, and if she says this, and if she does this, then that's a sign. Where did he get these signs from? He made it up himself. Even when he did it on his own, this is still completely unified with Abraham. But often that he had nothing of his own at all, like a shadchan. So if so, he was able to be a agent and include this ability to be an agent also in his total devotion to Abraham. That he is a thing in himself, and he's got no, I'm sorry, he could act also like an agent, that an agent is a third party, as just doing a job for somebody else who was doing the job for Abraham. And that category of being an agent, he also devoted that totally to Abraham. In other words, the decisions that he made on his own and his own separate way of thinking, this was also exactly what Abraham would have done, what he wanted. Let's explain this a little bit deeper. in Likutei Torah, in the end of Likutei Torah, in the end of Parshas Bracha, right near the end, the Alter Rebbe says that the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, this is a very general thing in the whole entire Torah and in all of creation. And in fact, this marriage between Yitzchak and Rivka, this is a, what do you want to call it, a view. This includes in it an overview of the whole service of man in the world. What are we here for? A person lives for a certain amount of time. How much do we live? A person born at a certain time, he dies in a certain time. He has a certain amount of time in this world. What do you do? What are we here for? What are we supposed to do? It says, what are we supposed to do? We're supposed to be here to do something meaningful, to do something true, right? We're not here just to eat, eat and to drink and things. That animals do that. And so some people say, that's it. We're just animals and we have no, purpose. Well, Judaism says not. First of all, human beings that really think that way, they're usually pretty miserable. They're pretty miserable people, usually. And it's possible to be happy, although it could be. But then, this is sort of the source of all misery and confusion and aggression and hatred and fear and hate that's in the world. Namely, a person thinks, I'm not here for any reason, How do they say? Nothing really matters. One of the worst diseases there can possibly in the world, emptiness. Says, really, what is man here for? Man is here in order to reveal God in the world, reveal the Creator in the creation. You think there is no Creator? You think there isn't a Creator? That's because the Jews aren't doing their job. We're supposed to reveal the fact that, in fact, there is a Creator in the world. I remember I saw a video, they interviewed a few people that were serial killers, and they asked them, don't you have any regret for what you did? I said, no regret. Right? They have these Nazis, these guys that were killing people in the concentration camp. Don't you feel bad you killed people? Nah, that was my job, right? They brought Eichmann to trial. He said, listen, I was just a soldier. I was doing my job. You're doing your job. You were killing babies. You were killing people. And here I have a letter that says that you were enthusiastic. You wished you could have killed more. I said, yeah, I was just enthusiastic in my job. It wasn't there's no purpose. There's no purpose to life. You say, everybody's going to die anyway. So I just, sped up the process. Is that really why we're here? We're here for no reason whatsoever. There is no reason. He says, listen, that's the best reason to show that we really have to work hard. The people think that there is no reason in the world because Hashem is not revealed here. Nobody feels there's a purpose to life. The job of the Jewish people is supposed to be to unite godliness with the world so that everyone knows that there is God. There won't be any more serial murderers. There won't be any more Nazis. There won't be any meaningless people. That's the job of the Jews, to make Yichud Ma, which is Yitzchak, and Ban. Two Kabbalistic levels. It's talking about Ma and our purpose. As far as we're concerned, this means Ma is the spiritual, and Ban is the physical. And this is represented by Ma as the giver. Why we always refer to God in the masculine, because he's the giver, he gives everything. And Ban is the feminine, is the receiver. This world has to receive from God. Right? If it doesn't, then we get the meaningless world we have here. This is the unity of the soul, Ma, and the body of every Jew. Until there is a complete unification of the Jewish people, which that represents Yitzchak. Rivka. We're the feminine. That's the Neshamas Begufim, and God, who is the masculine. Yisrael and the Kodesh Baruch Hu Kuluchad. Like it was in the Holy Temple. You go in the Holy Temple, you'd feel God. Kafi Shazeh, like it will be in the future redemption. That's what Yitzchak and Rivka and Avram and Eliezer, that was what they were moving toward. That was their real goal, the future redemption. After they began with this, and the Yerusim, first of all, they had to be, the Jewish people will get married to God. First of all, there's the engagement party. What was the engagement party? Matan Torah, when God gave the Torah. The giving of the Torah, that's the engagement. And the Mashiach bringing rebuilding the third temple, that's going to be the real marriage. This is the whole service of man and doing Torah and mitzvahs in this world, unifying Ma and Ban, Hashem and the world. The novelty of Matan Torah is also expressed in this. Namely, then Matan Torah, there was negated the decree that separated the upper worlds from the lower worlds. The upper world spiritual is Ma, the physical world is Ban. The Az then, by the way, this name Ma and Ban, you probably know, it's just different filling up the names of God. It's called Miluyim. But Az then, Natan, a Koach, there's given the power at Mount Sinai. Then there was also a wedding, but that was like the engagement. It's nothing like the real thing. The real thing is going to be when Mashiach comes and builds the third temple. Then at Mount Sinai, there was given the power to join and to unite physical and spiritual. We do a commandment in this world, a physical commandment, and really it's the will of God right now. Shaguf, the physical body, and the physical thing that we deal with becomes holy. And in fact, it becomes like a unit of holiness. Shleimus Yichud Zeh, this completion of the uniting of Ma and Ban will be in the Geula Mitit, in the future redemption by Mashiach. Then it will be really what it says, the Kevas of Gever, it'll be that the feminine aspect, the receiver, will be even higher than the giving aspect. This world will be higher than the upper worlds, as we'll explain later. Ubepratos, and in detail, Rivka, she was living in a place called Padan Aram, outside of the land of Israel. And by Betuel, Ha'arami, and Lavan, Ha'arami, Keshushana ben Achochim. Even though they was all relatives of Abraham, right? They came from Nahor. Ubechinas Ban. This is the level of Ban. Ban is the world. The world is where Betuel and all these people are. Eliezer, and what did Eliezer have to do? Eliezer had to take out from there and to bring Rivka, to take her out from there and to bring her to be by Yitzchak. Yitzchak was called an Ola Tamima. Yitzchak couldn't leave the land of Israel. He was pure. Yitzchak represents this aspect of Ma, spiritual. His job of Eliezer was to elevate Rivka, who was the physical, this name of Ban, and away and to unify her with Yitzchak so that they would be like one flesh. Ma Ban. Where is this represented? This is represented by every time a Jew gets married, Shibana Beis Yisrael, Ba'olam Hazeh Gashmi, we're making in this physical world, elevating it to godliness. The whole purpose is to give birth to children. Simply, there can be more Jews in the world. Shemi, and that from this will come all of the Jewish people to the end of all generations. That was begun with Yitzchak and Rivka. So according to this, now we can understand. Yitzchak and Rivka, they brought about the Jewish people. The Jewish people, by their service, they bring about Mashiach. Mashiach, he brings about the unification of God with the world. Therefore, the shlichus of Eliezer, he was the first shliach. That's written in the Torah. This gave the power that every single Jew can unite Ma and Ban in the service of God. Beginning, we also got the power of Matan Torah. This even gave us more power. And from there is drawn down to all of the times, every single time, right now, and every place, until the Shlemas was Geula Mitis of Shlema, that we'll be able to see in every detail of the world this unification of the Creator and the creation, Ma and Ban. And this all began with the marriage of Yitzchak and Rivka, and this was facilitated by the shlichus of Eliezer. But Yeshlom, we can say that the shlichus in general of Eliezer, this is also hinted at by what it says, Eved Avram Anochi. When Eliezer reached his goal, and he met Betuel and Lavan and everything, and they said, "Who are you?" He said, "I am a servant of Abraham." Eved Avraham. He didn't say, my name is Yishmael, my name is Eliezer, I have these people, I come from here. The first thing he said was, Eved Avraham Anochi. I am a servant of Abraham. Yadu, it's known that from Abraham began the preparation for Matan Torah. You ever hear of this? 2,000 years of confusion? And that was from Adam until Abraham. 2,000 years of Torah started from Abraham until the temple. And then 2,000 years of Mashiach, that begins when the temple is. Okay. Zeu or Remez, Eved Avraham Anochi. That's the hint that that Abraham said, I am a servant of Abraham. That's my whole existence. That's what Eliezer said. Shebiyot or Eved Avram, that because he was, his whole existence, his whole being was only one thing. I am a servant of Abraham. You're looking at me, you're looking at Abraham. By means of this, that he didn't think about himself, Eliezer had the power to bring about the unity of Ma'amban. Masu Yitzchak and Rivka. Gam Iker Kahachana Tavdunas Elokim. This was the main preparation of the unity that would come at Mount Sinai, when Anochi would come down and reveal to the Jewish people. Okay, still we have a few things to understand, and we'll, God willing, we'll understand them next time. But I just want to say one short thing. There was a very, very famous now Rabbi Jonathan Sax. He was the head chief rabbi of England, and he was a very excellent speaker, a very unique person, a very talented person. And he made a speech in the Knesset Shluchim, in the Shluchim convention. I don't know if it was last year or the year before. Anyway, it was recently. And he's an excellent speaker. And he also has what to say. But the one part where he said that he went into the Rebbe for Yechidus, and the Rebbe, he said he was not religious or just on the border of being religious. And he had questions to ask, philosophical questions, and questions about Judaism. And and the Rebbe all of a sudden started asking him questions. Said, where do you learn? You learn in Cambridge? Is there a place for Jewish people to eat? He realized that the Rebbe was making him a shliach. So his take on that was that the Rebbe was making him a leader. And he said this to the whole crowd. Hundreds of shluchim were there, thousands, who knows, in a huge banquet room. He said the Lubavitch Rebbe does not want followers. The Lubavitcher Rebbe, he said, anyone makes followers. The Lubavitcher Rebbe makes leaders. And of course, everybody really enjoyed that, and they were clapping and they stood up, and it's a very inspiring thing. It's a very good point in a speech, very unique way of looking at things. But from we see over here, that's only half of the picture. Eliezer, the whole thing of Eliezer was not that he was a leader. It's not that he took things into his own hands. Eliezer's whole thing was he was a follower. He was totally united to Abraham. He had no will, so to speak, of his own. We see that he made up all these ideas, how to choose Rivka, etc. So, okay, that's the half that he's a leader. Yes, Abraham wanted him to be an agent, a shliach, on his own, a separate identity, to have his own ego, holy ego, but to have his own ego. Yes, right. But the main thing of it is that he was Eved Avraham Anochi. That's the essence of who he was. I am not a leader. I am a servant. I am a servant of Abraham. And in order to be a servant, times I have to be a leader also. So this is what we're learning, the importance of being a servant of Abraham, the importance of being connected to the Rebbe and being a servant, carrying out exactly, because what's the Rebbe? The Rebbe, he's the biggest servant of all. Like we said before, Mashiach, he's the ultimate shliach. As we'll talk about more, God willing, tomorrow. Thank you for coming. We'll learn today at 3:00. God bless you. Shalom.